Good afternoon and welcome back to the CUNY Black Male Initiative Dialogue Series. We're so excited to be joined by some powerhouses today who are leaders in the mentoring and purpose and leadership space. And so I'm excited to announce them, but I want to really quickly just announce who I am. My name is Dr. Sean Best, University Director for the CUNY Black Male Initiative, and I've been so honored to serve this organization, the City University of New York, and a group of 31 CUNY Black Male Initiative or CUNY BMI projects across the university system. We serve students that are all the way from pre-college, about to get their HSCs, to those who are in community college, senior colleges, and also those who are even in law school and in medical school as well. Even my colleague, University Assistant Director, Mr. Jorge Alguera, is also in law school at CUNY Law School and being supported by BMI as well. So we are so excited to bring to you an opportunity for us to dialogue with leaders that give us insight and wisdom about how we engage with leadership and mentorship across the system, helping support primarily Black and Latino men, but also just all those who are engaged and a part of the CUNY BMI projects across the board. So these recorded series dialogues are really intended for us to share them with students, share them with administrators, and also community members who are making an impact and making a difference and creating a generation of leaders for the next generation and for the current now generation. With that being said, we're in full pandemic mode. So we understand that we have to do everything virtually, but we're so grateful that you chose to check in with us, and we appreciate you being here. We're really all in this together. With that being said, I want to talk a little bit about today's purpose and why we're here. So the topic of today's meeting is we are our brother's keeper. And that means that is looking at our mentorship, our purpose, and our leadership. So when we think about this, having purpose, mentorship, and leadership, and the role of that in our lives, I think about these three individuals who are joining us on the panel today. Let me introduce to you who they are and give you a little bit of their background. First, I want to just say hello to the panelists. Hey guys, how y'all doing?
We're doing great.
All right, Sean.
Good to be here.
Blessed and glad to be here.
Great. I'll do a quick intro and then feel free to add on whatever you'd like to add on at the end of that. But I just want to just real quick, just introduce Dr. Ron Mincy. And let me tell you a little bit about who he is and why he's important to us. First, quick shout out to Mr. Ron West, who works with CUNY BMI essentially to help us find such amazing leaders in the community. So shout out to him. He introduced me to Dr. Ron Mincy, who is the Maurice V. Russell Professor of Social Policy and Social Work Practice at the Columbia University School of Social Work, and a co-principal investigator of the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Study and Paternal Health Project, which is here based in New York. He's also a winner of the Society for Social Work Research 2021 Social Policy Research Award. And he came to Columbia from the Ford Foundation, where he served as a senior program officer and developed the Strengthening Fragile Families Initiative. So Dr. Mincy has been published widely, and he's talked a lot about the effects of income insecurity and policy on child and family poverty. He's also published by Oxford University Press and building on his earlier work with the most recent book entitled Failing Our Fathers, which you might want to follow. We'll put some links in the chat. But his training is in Harvard University, MIT. Been married for 46 years. He's my neighbor. He lives in Harlem next to me. And so it's great to have you here, Dr. Mincy. And we're so glad you joined us today.
My real pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Next is Dr. Mahaliel. I'm always saying his name wrong. Dr. Mahaliel Bethia, who's always been in my corner, my brother. He is doing great work with the My Brother's Keeper grant-funded programs at the NYC Department of Education. He also served as a founding principal of the Eagle Academy with our brother David Banks over there for young men in Harlem. He's been a history teacher, a coach, a department chair. He's done so many things in education. And he's also just started his career with Teach for America. So he really has a lot of things going for him and is on his way up in this world. So pay attention to what he's doing. He also received his Doctor of Education from Fordham University. I believe he got his around the same time I got mine last year. So we still haven't had a party yet or turned up yet. So we got
not had to turn up yet.
It's coming, man. We're going to do it soon. Now that we're vaccinated, we can get out there again, hopefully again. And so he has a great pedigree of leadership, as well as just aspirations to make sure that there are paved pathways for young men, especially in boys of color, to really find their way in their careers, find their way through academic achievements, and also just have mentors along their way in life. He's a living example of that. So Dr. Bethia, thank you for joining us. We're so glad you're here with us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Yes, sir. Finally, last and certainly not least, when I got to New York City in 2002, I met this dynamic young man who who really became my mentor and a friend very quickly. Alan McFarland at New York University is the assistant vice president for outreach and engagement. And he has been over a 30-year veteran of higher education who's championed initiatives that are around student meeting initiatives, around diversity, around alumni, career development. He's done so many things, and he's really been the heart and lifeblood at NYU. And many people know that if you've gone through a higher education administration program at NYU, you're going to meet Mr. McFarland at some point. He's going to be influential in your life at some point. And I can read on and on about him. He's a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Upon his honorable discharge at the rank of sergeant, he returned to NYU. He holds his undergrad in social sciences and the master's in student personnel administration from Steinhardt, where I got my master's as well. And he has been really a recipient of a lot of awards, but also chartered a Baldwin project, which I loved, following how he charted the life of James Baldwin and really helped students to understand the cultural legacy of Black and brown authors. And so he brings such a vast variety of experiences to this conversation. He's been my personal mentor and helped me really establish myself in my career when I didn't know what to do and where I was going. And one of the first things, Alan, I don't know if you remember doing this, but when I got to your office and met you, and I was asking you like how to be a college student, how to be a master's student, how to do my work, you showed me a stack of notepads that you have kept for like 20 years of doing your to-do list every day. And you said every Friday o'clock at 4 p.m., you would go through the list and like make sure you set it up for the next week so you knew what you're doing. To this day, Alan, I have 14 years of books of my to-do list, and because of you, man. So you changed my life, and I really appreciate you and for being here, and thanks for joining us today.
Such my pleasure. I'm humbled by your introduction and so happy to be here. And hello to all my fellow panelists.
Absolutely, man. Great to have you. All right, so I'm going to do a quick overview, and then we're going to get right into you because we're centered on you all being here today. So the reason why this conversation was so important to us is because we really want to always provide information, inspiration, motivation, and education to our students as we do this work. We can all agree that talking about and to our younger Black brothers and Latinx brothers as well should be a combination of aspiring, empowering, transformative, habit-breaking, forming, uplifting, prioritizing, purpose conversation, right? And so when we think about doing our work, we want to apply your shared wisdom, practical and applied philosophy, and your knowledge of your life experience to these conversations that it can help the next generation go on and on. I believe that our spirits never die. I believe that we just pass on who we are from person to person. And so I actually told my mom, I'm like, look, you better have a party when I die because I lived my life to the fullest. And I lived it with so much joy. So my spirit passes on to you and to you and to you. And so when we think about having an opportunity to transform the process of Black men growing up to be more productive, honest, responsible, nurturing, stable members of this community, I think about what it means to actually have mentorship, what it means to have purpose, what it means to have leadership. We live in a very chaotic, misinformed, anti-men of color society, right? Where we're not always given positive messages about who we are. We're seen as the diverse one, or we're seen as the other, instead of seeing as just an accepted person for who we are, being fully belonging and fully accepted for just bringing ourselves to the table. So with that being said, we're gonna just have a conversation. I'm gonna probably call on you by name, but at any point you wanna jump on in, go ahead and jump on in so we can make sure we hear your perspective. But as seasoned professionals, directors, administrators, policymakers, what you all do, I'm just curious if you could start out with this. Tell me what the role of mentorship has been in your life. How has that either transformed your life or impacted you? Who are your mentors? Who did you choose? How do you see mentorship? And I'd love you to just give me an overview of your relationship with mentorship. So we can just start there, and then I'll dive into some more deeper specific questions later. So I'm going to start with Dr. Mincy, then Mahaliel, and then I'll go to Alan after that. Dr. Mincy?
Well, thank you so much. So I would just begin by saying that I went all the way through 2 years or so after I finished my PhD before I ever had a professional mentor. And so I think the topic that you're talking about is absolutely crucial, because there are so many unwritten rules in most careers. And one of the roles of a mentor is to show you what those unwritten rules are all about. And so I think it's really, really important. My first academic mentor was a woman. Her name was Isabel Sawhill, and I worked for her when I went to the Urban Institute, and I learned so many things from her. She was a white female. And my academic mentors are, for the most part, people who are white, because I've worked at primarily top tier academic institutions, research institutions, and the like. My first professional mentor, who was Black, was Bob Curvin, who I met at the Ford Foundation, and I just wish that I had had the privilege of meeting Bob earlier in my life. He passed away several years ago, but he was really, really critical in helping me learn my craft as a program officer. And no one is trained to give away money; you fall into it, right? And he helped me negotiate and understand what my environment was at the Ford Foundation. He helped me figure out how to work within the institution and then bring about my own passion in terms of the work that I had an opportunity to do. And so I think that mentorship is really, really critical. The last thing I'll say, in order to let my brothers talk, is that I have the challenge, on the other hand, of not really being in a position of being a professional mentor to other men of color. I teach at the Columbia School of Social Work. It's a school of social work. Therefore, there are very few students of color there. Secondly, there are very few men of color there. And I teach in economics and social welfare policy, where there are very, very few Black students in there. And finally, my school is a master's level program. And so my opportunities to meet within my home, where I can get my hands on them, are few and far between. But I mentor scholars elsewhere throughout the country through my research projects and the like. And I really like an opportunity to use this opportunity to make some connections with people who are interested in an academic career, interested in a policy career, because I think in these days, as you guys know, everybody on the planet, because of the sad death of an unfortunate, tragic death of George Floyd, is looking for a competent Black academic who knows something about structural racism. So the door is wide open, and more men of color ought to get into this field. Thank you.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, I look forward to sharing and hearing more about your work later, so that we can also just see what access points there are to get into that field as well. So thanks for sharing that. Mahaliel, please.
Yeah, so I guess for mentor, I think one of the things that was important for me is that they were mentors that they're almost in two different types of categories. There were these mentors that were influencers. I never asked them to be my mentors, but just by them like being in my presence, right, I got access to seeing like things that I didn't necessarily think I could do myself, right? And so, I think about my own father, right, who was an entrepreneur. He owned karate schools, right? Like he owned a bunch of businesses, and like that was something that became very normal to me by virtue of him just existing, right, and like being in my life. I think about in my professional career, the male teachers that I saw. I had very few male teachers, but I had this one teacher in 7th grade. His name was Mr. Whaley. I don't even know if he remembers me, but I remember him, right? And he taught ELA, and he was like the basketball coach, and he was just like, and he was the only male teacher I ever had in my like K-8 experience. And he was the only man of color that I'd ever had as a teacher. And I think that unbeknownst to him, he kind of gave me access to say, oh, like you could be a male of color and also teach and like be cool about it, right? And I think I remember the male teachers that I stole from, right? Like in terms of their style, their mannerisms, their approach to students, just because they existed in the space. And then I think about like my professional mentors now. I think about Jonathan Foy and Kamal Patel. Like these were folks that like claimed my success before I even like was able to make sense of it, right? And I use a story of like me sitting in my principal's chair, like typing work, and him walking in my office and saying like, "You look good in that chair." And like, I'm not like,
Wow.
again, I'm not sure if he ever, like, I don't know if he knew what he was doing in that moment, right? But for me, like, that was like, oh, I could be a principal. Like, I could do this, right? And then I became a principal at 28 years old, right? I founded the school at 28. And so I think that for me, mentors come in many different forms and fashions. And I think that one of the things we have to always be on the lookout for is, yes, who are these mentors that are going to fill my gaps and grow me? Right? Who are the mentors that I'm going to go to and say, listen, I need something from you, right? I need you to pour into me, but also like to be mindful of all of like the power of men of color, in particular, Black men, right? Being in spaces and like the power of that presence in spaces for people, for young men and for adults, right? So that's my thinking around mentoring.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think about how sometimes you can have a mentor without even them suspecting that they're your mentor, right? You're just watching and learning and just infusing and taking in what's being said to you from them and just watching their looks. And so that brings me to my guy, Alan, who I watched for many years in those formative years in my master's program. So Alan, just give us a little bit about your insight about mentorship.
I definitely, again, thank you. I just have to say this about you, Dr. Best, and just a minute on you and the day you did show up in my office and that inquisitive eye and that desire to engage the community and to make an impact and to reach out to your brothers and your sisters and gentlemen and everyone listening on this call. Sometimes you got to go and get your mentors. And so that's what Sean Best did. And he and I worked on a number of programs, but one of the ones that come to mind is the Network of Black Men, and Black standing for building leaders in action through through community and kinship. And we were even thinking about the diversity of Black men at that time. And Sean volunteered to work with me as a graduate student. He wasn't even getting paid. And he was there every week to work with other young men who are doing great things to this day. And thank you, Dr. Mincy. And so I want to just lift up Dr. Best's success, and that I believe it is a blessing that I'm actually here to even witness him hosting this event. And I'm grateful to God that this is actually happening. I know I'm embarrassing him right now, but I'm just telling the truth. Okay, so for my mentors, I want to thank Dr. Mincy for bringing out a PWI. It is different. You know, I've worked at NYU for about 40 years now. And I've had many encounters and connections, but I need to step back, think about my family, my uncles. I had like 6 or 7 uncles. They all worked hard. I had an uncle who's in the military, who was actually retired from the US Army. I'm actually going to be seeing him soon. And he said, do not come down here without your vaccination. And he's a retired military command sergeant major in the Army. So my family's, in many ways, my uncles have been my mentors. And then there are programs that are mentors. I was part of the boys club in Flushing, Queens. I was going to the boys club at 16 years old. I remember one teacher that was there. Now his name escapes me, and that's because I'm old, y'all. I can't do that. And I'll tell you that they're going to the boys club and being at a place in a space where you are nurtured and supported is also important to this question of mentorship. My church, you know, going to church, I'm a spiritual person. I think that seeing the men in suits, seeing the lay leaders, seeing the trustees was a huge impact in terms of how I think about myself. And then there's the mentorship of literature. Dr. Best talked about Baldwin. I'm also thinking a lot about Ralph Ellison. This month is the month of the anniversary, not only of his death, but also the publishing of Invisible Man. Behind me is the actual structure of the actual Catelet, Elizabeth Catelet structure of the bronze structure that illuminates the Invisible Man in Riverside Park on 150th Street. So thinking a lot about Invisible Man, and Dr. Mincy mentioned George Floyd is certainly heavy on my heart as well. So, and then I want to also say last thing about the mentorship. You know, there are introverts and extroverts. You know, there are men who are sometimes shy about reaching out. And so we have to make sure that we do reach out to other students as well. And gentlemen, 10 minutes ago, I got an email from the director of NYU Ghana who asked me about connecting with a 16-year-old who lives in Brooklyn. And he asked me what I meant to this student. This was 10 minutes ago. I just emailed him back, said, of course. You know, when they come to your door, you have to, I try to say yes. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer as well. And I'm moved by the idea that, sometimes we have to go out and find our mentors. I think a lot about how, especially, CUNY BMI is open to everyone. We have students from every background, every race, every gender, every sexual orientation. So we're very open. But obviously it was started with the impetus of helping support Black and Latino males, because that was the poorest performing group at CUNY, academically speaking. And even though we don't touch all the Black and Latino males, we touch a good portion that really allows us to give a chance to speak into their lives. So when I think about young men, and I think about the community support that is necessary for them to find their academic and economic mobility, I'm wondering what you would say as a first step for those young men, would be the right community groups to be a part of, and what are some ways for young men to get, and older men, we have also older men in our group as well. If someone was saying, hey, you know what, I never really relied on my community or others. Matter of fact, it almost seems like a point of weakness to rely on someone else. What would you say in terms of getting a young man or an older man started, especially a Black or brown man who's used to doing it on their own or maybe not relying on community members? How would you encourage them to get started, to get connected to community groups? Or what kinds of ways would you encourage them or inspire them to join a community that can help actually widen their perspective and help them accomplish their personal, academic, and economic goals that they've set for themselves? So I'm going to ask, go in reverse order this time. Go Alan, and then come back to Mahalil next.
Well, I said I was a spiritual person. And I know that that could be for many people, in terms of where they are in their own lives. And I'm not pushing any agenda on anyone, but the church is such a place where the issues of trust are such a huge paramount for engagement that I would certainly want to lift up that as a resource, as something to be thinking about. It's because I have actually mentored many students, many young people from my church who actually saw me in the church and said, would you speak? Can I talk to you about my career or my education? And I was actually part of mentoring programs, not only within my church, but also just because they saw me on a Sunday or they saw me give the children's message. And so sometimes the opportunity is right there in front of you. It's like right there. Walk into a place of worship, if you haven't thought about that. And I know this sounds like I'm preaching, giving testimony. I really want to make this perfectly clear about you finding different avenues and making the decision for yourself. So in terms of it being a foundational place that has been in our community for 400 years, and not to be thinking about it as a possibility is an opportunity that's being missed and being lost. I just want to say that is something to take a step back and say, maybe I just take a step in that direction. Second thing is I want to lift up Black publications. I subscribe to the New York Amsterdam News. I love getting that paper. I can't tell you how many times I just sent out a message to all of my folks on Facebook about a program that Goldman Sachs is funding $110 billion over the next 10 years for Black women entrepreneurs. I didn't read that in the Times. I didn't read it in the Wall Street Journal. I read it in the Amsterdam News. And not only did I post it in the Amsterdam, posted on my Facebook page, I reported the source. So Black newspapers are about things that are important to the Black community. If you are not engaged in reading those kinds of papers, you're waiting for it to come from some other place. That's two. Last thing that comes to mind for me is definitely, in terms of if you're in school, in terms of your networking, if you're in high school, every student should go see their guidance counselor because they can't help you if they don't know you. Now think about it being strategic now, thinking about it being networking and making connections. You should go to your guidance counselor and make sure they know who you are and build that relationship. And that should be part of your plan. So those are the three things that jump out at me. Not to mention community organizations that may be advertising and in terms of where you may live or the school itself. So those are the three things that jump out at me in terms of how to get connected.
Awesome.
And there's so many. Oh, last thing I want to say, and then those resources by the campaign of Black Male Achievement. I mean, my gosh, come on now, that is like the groundswell of opportunities, on a national level. So I'll end there.
Yes. Well, our good brother, brother Sean Dove, who I call the better Sean, doing this great work out here. He's certainly always a wealth of resources and always providing guidance for Black men across the country to have that support and get resources. But I love what you said about, even though you may not find, it's interesting because my journey in my own faith has kind of evolved in some ways where, I don't really go to church anymore like that. Like I used to when I was a kid, and I was in church 4 times a week with a Bible service every other night. But, but these days it's like, I still find the church in my community to be a real pillar of connection, of education, of access, of resources. There's a lot of good things that can be gained there. So I've learned over time, you take what you can take that works for you, and what doesn't work for you, you don't take. And so with that being said, I love that. And reading, so important to read, whether it be the newspaper or some resources. I love that. Guidance counselor, great advice, great resources. And so we'll keep adding on to that, and we'll keep taking some notes as we go along. So Mahaliel, please.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of this from the space of like, well, where do I get started, right? If I've somehow identified I need a mentor, but I don't quite know like where to start. I think of a few things. I think one, I really encourage folks to check out, by way, and I'll talk about social media in a moment, but checking out community spaces in their communities. The church is one space, right? And no, Alan, you're not preaching, right? Like regardless of your faith, I think the churches in a particular community, particularly in communities of color, right, can serve as a connector to some other resources. I also say that the community centers are more than basketball, right? And so when we're thinking about, when I always watch my kids, like I realize, oh, they're at the Y and they're at the boys club of New York, and but they're like just going for like this one aspect of what that organization that may be. I mean, usually it's something like athletic, right? But I would argue up and say, like, if you are someone that is going into those spaces, those are great centers for mentorship. There are a lot of people that are working there because they believe heavily in your success. And so if you can go there to play ball, if you can go to the Y to play ball, you can also go to one of the education programs, and you'll be able to find potentially some folks that you want to gain some knowledge from. Because mentoring is really, when you boil it down, that's what it's about. It's about gaining understandings and knowledge, learning things, and then also like showing that mentor, right? And teaching that mentor, because I've been taught by many of my mentees about things. Which brings me to my last point. I think social media is probably one of the easiest kind of first steps. You can, and I always laugh at those Facebook commercials where it's like whatever kind of group you want, right? Like if it's like we eat French fries on a Thursday, Like there's a group for that, right? And there are groups on Facebook, on Instagram, there are these groups that are providing these resources. I'm on a few myself. Like there's a Black male educator group. There is Black male teachers in particular. There's a bunch of different opportunities for you to just gather knowledge and information from your social media. So yes, you can look through those pictures, but there's also some chances for you to get connected through these groups that are already set up. And I think it's a non-risky type of first step. Just join them, see what information they have to offer. In the same way that Alan was putting out that information to the group, there are hundreds of people doing this work of passing information through these social media groups. And so those are the three things I would consider and offer up.
And Mahal, if you can just expand a little bit on what is the advantage of joining a group like this as opposed to going through it alone?
Yeah. So there's a few things. One, I think sometimes we can be so isolated like, not because we want to, but just because by virtue of just how we may be feeling. COVID has made us particularly like, been in my house, I'm stuck. And these groups are very beneficial in, one, like confirming you're not crazy, right? And saying, okay, like you're not the only one experiencing this right now. And this is some resources. I'm like part of a fitness group, right? Where it's like, I like slipped on my diet today, and like someone communicates that, right? I think it's helpful, and particularly for men of color, as we are, in these spaces. If I'm a Black man that goes to a predominantly white institution, there are social media groups that connect the Black men in these institutions to say, well, this is your experience on this campus all the way on the other side of the country, but it matches mine. And so I think that these are the benefits. I think that social media has, in a very unique way, allowed us to build very specific communities that allow us to then, and you can be part of so many at the same time that you're building. And for me personally, like I'm part of probably like 5 to 10 different like Black educator groups that give me different information, different resources. And it doesn't require me to spend time like in these spaces all the time, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I think the benefits are, one, it's time efficient. 2, like you get information sent to you quickly. And 3, I think it gives you an opportunity to be as active or not active as you want to be in a particular group for a particular reason in a particular season.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Dr. Mincy, please. We need to have you unmute yourself. Thank you.
So I just want to second what Dr. McFarland talked about, and I'm just going to be real clear about this. I don't mind doing some preaching here, because I think the things that we're talking to young men about have much to do not only about their professional careers and the intermingling of their academic careers, their work careers, their families, but things that hold all of that together. And in my own personal life, the mentorship that I've received in the church has been one of the most important influences in my life. I mentioned my field of research is fatherhood, and non-resident fatherhood is that. So at that. And my research is all about how frequently it is that African-American children and boys grow up without their fathers. That's what I do. I grew up without my father, and that's why I studied that work. And what I know is that, and as a consequence of that, there are many Black men in this country who don't have the experience of learning how to receive information from an older man, because that has not been part of their growing up experience. So I learned everything about being a father from I recall laying down and reading about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the way in which they blessed their children. And I've tried to pattern my life out of those things earlier. And the other things that I learned about being a father were about were taught to me from men that I learned in the church, and what Jesus Christ has to say about his Father, and what so many of the apostles and prophets talked about in terms of the ways in which they bless their children, especially they bless their sons. So, I can't help being unabashed about Malachi chapter 4, verse 10, that says, "Behold, I'm going to send you a prophet who, and he will restore the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers." And that was my own word that I have patted my entire career about. And I'm going to be unabashed by putting it out there. There are things that you have to learn about your relationship with your wife, your relationship with your partner, how to encourage your son or your daughter, how to discipline them and encourage them in ways that they can receive correction from you, and yet you can still remain friends. I talk to my 40 and 50-year-old children, sons, every single week. And that is a consequence of things that I learned about being a father from the scriptures. And so I'm not going to be unabashed about that. So I think the other things that are important here about mentorship are that you need to put your position to volunteer to learn from someone and to serve someone in some way, because that creates the excellent opportunity for mentorship relationships to be developed. I think professionally, the way I see it, people who have wide experience in any area, they have that experience and they know the lay of the land. But younger folk have lots of technical skills that us older folk don't have, right? And so the opportunity for mentorship comes about because of shared expertise, right? I may know the important research questions, right? But I don't know my way around social media to save my life, right? And the younger people I work with give me that skill, and I give them some skill in return. And so in part, mentorship, the opportunities, particularly for mentorship, come about because of the skills that you have, and those skills have value, and they provide value to people who have other kinds of skills. And the two of you put those things together, and as a consequence of that, you can serve somebody else, but they can serve you in terms of providing that experience. And so people are looking for mentors, right? In part because the mentors have skills that they need, and then the trade can be even and not always one-sided.
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So, Dr. Mincy, just give me, what are the consequences? What are the threats to our community if we don't engage in this work, if we don't volunteer, if we don't have a forum or a platform to share skills with someone else through an internship or some sort of relationship with someone who can build us? What happens to us if we don't engage in these connections?
I think that the consequences are, enshrined in the idea that, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Because, you are all in academia, how success in academic environments involves it's all about intelligence and talent and all that, but it also is about making the right decisions about what courses you take, about a whole variety of things that lots of students would have no reason to know, because many of us are first generation students, right? Most of the people with whom we go, many of the people with whom we go to school with, they have uncles and cousins and fathers, and they've gone to college, they're professionals themselves, and they've already known how to negotiate all this stuff. For so many students of color, that is not the case. For so many men of color, that is not the case. And therefore, you can take smart people and talented people and people who are willing to work hard, but you lose them in terms of their persistence in higher education because they make mistakes, right? And so the question is, not everybody has the skill set to go to college, and we need to be, I'm an economist, we need to be availing ourselves and ensuring success out of everyone who gets the opportunity to go. And the problem is that because many students don't have the supports that they need, they end up not being successful. We have, by the way, closed the gap in terms of enrollment in college among Black and white students around the country, around Black men and white men around the country. But we still have huge gaps in terms of graduation rates. And that, in my mind, is just waste. And so I think that's the cost of not And by the way, the forums that we're talking about right now, so I did a study which I posted in the chat that was funded by the Luma Foundation, and it was about persistence and completion in higher education. And one of the things that it talks about is that we need to create safe spaces for students of color, particularly men, to relate to one another and relate to the institution, because among other things, it's the lack of their feelings of belonging that discourage their completion. And if I have an opportunity, I'll say more about that later, but please do look at the study.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's actually on the description of the YouTube already, which we which you just mentioned, that study. So fantastic. We're excited to hear more about that work. You talk about like fatherhood as a really important factor of us being men who have the right relationships in our life. And the study that you're doing as well, Dr. Mincy. So I kind of want to just pivot there a little bit about fatherhood. I believe you all are fathers and have had the experience of raising children. And I think, is that right? Am I correct about that? Not yet. Okay. Dr. Bethia is like, nope, not yet. I'm not claiming nobody out here. I got you, man. And so I also haven't experienced that yet as well. And I think about the role of fathers in terms of even what Dr. Mincy started speaking about, which is that maybe some things need to be passed on from the fathers to the sons that are not being passed on, and the consequences that you just sort of referenced about what happens when community messages are not passed on from their father to their son, right? And so we know that, you know, James Baldwin has a quote, and I know I'm going to mess it up, but it's something like, to be African American in this country means to be you know, African without any history and American without any of its privileges, right? And so that we know that we all have to experience this sense of loss daily that still pervades the Black community, where messages about who we were and, you know, the lineage of our greatness has not been passed on. We had to learn in this country how to be great in our own ways and create our own styles and our own music and our own culture around what being Black in America looks like. So when I think about fathers, right, and parenting, and even though all of you may not be fathers, you all have probably some parenting type relationships or mentees that you probably have raised over time. I know I have some young men who I've been following for so many years and watched them get married and have kids, and we still communicate. How has parenting, being a husband, showing affection between men, displaying compassion, communicating understanding, how have these behaviors that sometimes have been stripped away from us in the lineage of Black legacy, how have they played a role in your life? And how has even the pandemic even brought out this time, these sort of skills in you to be able to build that skill of passing down fatherhood information to the next generation? And so since Dr. Bethia, you and I are in the same boat, maybe not having personally raised kids yet, maybe you can go first in terms about even just your own relationship with mentoring and passing down communications and of love and legacy and greatness and instilling the things that fathers need to pass on to the next generation. How has that played a role in your life and the way you do your work?
I mean, huge. You know, I've worked in single sex schools for 14 years, right? And so I had 11-year-olds all the way through 17-year-olds. And that's been my work. I think the role of fatherhood, and I can speak to my own dad, right? Who even as I got older seemed to, our relationship, of course, matured. And he would say things to me that allowed me to feel comfortable to say things to my own young man, you know, like, I love you, right? Like, you know, like, you're beautiful, you know, like these things that we many times in our community, like almost like feminize, right? Like, it's not like, you know, so I was able to like talk to my guys and literally we would have town hall every morning. And, you know, I would say, you know, if no one's told you this morning, I love you, right? Like, you're loved this morning, right? Like, and I think that changed even the way that my young men were able to start their day, right? Because we take for granted that, like, like you look sharp right now. My kids all wore uniform. We would always talk about how sharp they were, or if they weren't sharp, it's like, I know you want your tie sharp, right? So I think that there's power not only in that father to son relationship. I think where mentoring really fills the gap for us is creating is reinforcing the village concept, right? Mm-hmm. Reinforcing the importance of saying, you know what, like, that uncle may not be his dad, but that uncle can support in growing, right, him in a way that his father may have wanted that to happen, right? Or same thing with the mentors and the mentees. And so as someone who was running all boys schools, I found that particularly, not the irony, but I thought the interesting part was many times it was, single mothers who would come to our school and say, like, I don't have these tools, right? But y'all do, right? And I'm charging you with helping me with this part of my son's growth, right? Not to say I'm not asking you to raise my child, but I am asking you to fill in these gaps. And so I think one, and I think the biggest part about, even when we talk about mentoring, like, the mentor has to, in many ways, utilize that opportunity to reflect on just like their own experience and the impact of their words, because sometimes it's the very subtle things we say that that kid will never forget, right? And I can remember at times when maybe like I raised my voice at a student and like had to bring that student back in my office. I was like, did I hurt your feelings when I did that? And they were like, yeah, like, and like they cry, in my office. And I'm like, that's not what I meant. But like just having those moments and understanding to say, if this young man has a father in their life, how can I be a supplement to that, right? Because dad may be learning too, right? I mean, I think Dr. Mincy brought it up before, right? Like, if we're the first, right, if we're trying to do this right, and like there is a huge narrative, our counter narrative out there. I'm thinking about dad's gang, the dad gang. I'm thinking about these folks that are like, no, we're in our sons' lives, we're in our daughters' lives, but they may be like, it may be the first time, right? They may be the one trying to break the generational, right, normalcy that may have been presented. So I say for those situations, and in general, that one, mentors have to determine like what gap am I being asked to fill, right? And then two, like, how do my own experiences now project onto that child? And like I'm talking about from a child's lens, but I would argue that this also works with adults. And for me personally, as my dad got older and more comfortable with like how he expressed himself, he was able to then talk to me in a different way. And so like every time I speak to him on the phone, he's like, I love you, son. And like, it's not like he never really said those things, but I hear it differently now. And so I just bring that up as like really the role that we as mentors have the privilege, right, and obligation to play when we're trying to help raise the village.
That's really good. That's really good. So many things there. Even just, it's interesting you talk about having even just that feeling of being able to say, I love you, right? To from man to man. I know so many young men through working in CUNY BMI for so many years who never heard that from another man, never heard that from a father, never heard that from a teacher, from a male role model. So, how transformative it is when we have that sort of openness and that sort of emotional connection that we can express verbally to each other.
And it requires a level of discomfort on our part, right? Yeah. I was very uncomfortable. I was like, I have 200 young people like sitting on the floor in a gym, and I'm on a microphone and I'm like, I love y'all. And like, they're looking around like, who's he talking to? Like, what's he, and so I push us as mentors to really think through, like, what are we, like, what really is the sum game here? Like, what are we trying to instill and leave? And then working from there and say, you know what, I want this young man to not only gain my skill set, but also like gain an emotional competency. I want them to be able to like navigate, because it makes no sense if I'm really, really smart and like I don't have the capacity, right, to like navigate hard discussions. You're gonna fail in college, right? Like if you can't like socially interact. So we have that responsibility to not only say, yeah, you got to know algebra, but you also got to know like how to navigate like this professor, or how to navigate like this discussion group, or how do you deal with all these things coming at you at once without like pressing the eject button or like these are the things that matter, in my opinion.
That's awesome. Dr. Mincy, I see you reacting, so I want to give you.
Yeah, so I apologize for dominating this discussion, but you guys have, you have to know how to fail, right? And you have to know how to be resilient in failure, right? So who do you take that info? I recall the day many years ago when I made a presentation at the Ford Foundation and I messed up, right? And it was Bob Curvin who told me, he said, look, you messed up, but you are in the catbird seat, right? You have access to resources. You are a steward. And if you're not doing something sufficiently risky such that you never failed, you're not taking advantage of the position that you're in. And that to me was the most encouraging piece of information I got. So let me correct something. First of all, it is true that Black men who are non-resident fathers are more likely to be involved with their children than are white men, right? Who are disconnected from the mothers of their children. So let me correct that. Black men are highly involved in the lives of their children during the first 5 years of their children's life. It's that afterwards, once they become separated from the mothers of their children, that's when the engagement declines, and the impact on those children's lives, particularly the lives of boys, can be pretty devastating. So I wanted to clarify that, and that's the issue. So the other thing that men and Black men don't learn enough from their fathers is to honor the mothers of their children, right? From whom do men know how to treat women? From their fathers and their mothers, right? So I understand, I know, I have the experience. I have an excellent wife. I've been blessed, right? And as I get older, as health issues kick in, my wife is my caretaker, right? And I'm going to survive much longer than other men who don't have that privilege, right? And so part of the thing that we are teaching our children is about how to sustain relationships with the women in our lives. Because if we fail to do that, our kids may know us from 1 to 5, but from 5 to 9 to 15 to 25 to 45, to the extent that we are no longer in good relationships with the mothers of our children, we will not be in good relationships with them. And by the way, our children, our sons need us at 5, 15, 19, 45, 50, because we have been through stuff that they're going to be through all along their lives. And they need someone who has had cancer, right? So that when it shows up for them, Dad, how did you handle this, right? And I know they've been through illnesses, they've been through all sorts of financial circumstances, or maybe they haven't, right? And so at every point in our children's development, right, in the development of young men, and that's the problem. I think society expects men generally to make things up on their own, right? And as a consequence, we don't understand that some men, Black men, are vulnerable all the time, but at some point, every Black man will be vulnerable in the sense that you'll have a health crisis, you have a financial crisis, et cetera, and you need someone in your life who you can let your hair down, pick up the phone and say, I've never been here before. How do I handle this, right? And if that person is your father, there's always a lot of human.
Repeat that, Dr. Mincy. You got to repeat that. Repeat that over again. Say that again. That was good.
I said that there are some Black men who are always vulnerable, but every Black man will be vulnerable at some point in his life. And that person needs someone that they can go to and say, I've never been in this situation before. How do I handle it? Right. And if that person has been someone engaged in your life from the cradle to wherever you are, that person has gold for you, both in the human capital the relationship capital that you have developed, and in whatever information they can share.
That's the word right there. We're putting that in the chat and YouTube. That's a great piece of advice and wisdom right there. I think many of us could have used years ago, but thank you for sharing that with us even right now in this moment. So Alan, please, I'd love to hear your perspective.
So the moment you discover your ancestors were enslaved, living is altered.
Mhm.
And I agree with so much with Dr. Bethea and Dr. Mency. So much, so enriching. I have my daughter just turned 21 years old yesterday, and I am grateful that I have
Birthday to her.
yeah, I'm grateful that I've remained in her life all her 21 years. I was not so lucky, gentlemen, growing up. I'm still waiting for the dad that I met one time to buy me the suit that he promised me. And I'm not going to get it because he has gone on. So we do have some very serious challenges that our men or I am faced with in thinking about that history and what does it mean to me. We are certainly, those who are out there experiencing this is carrying a heavy load. And so what's resonating with me is that you all heard the word intersectionality was jumping out at me as complexity. And Dr. Mincy is so right. The narrative is so against us that our complexity has become unimportant and unrecognized, which is also manifested in how we don't trust the system. And the system, in many ways, for some, we believe is not for us. And the cost that you mentioned, I want to step back to that question, that cost. There's the other cost of what institutions are doing to make themselves welcoming. What are they doing to invite us, to invite you, to invite any young person to the table or to the space or to the place? I want to be. I'm so thankful to the research that Dr. Mincy is doing because I feel like I'm living a whole lot of that. And so I want to lift up some literature, and thinking about the Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which I think is required reading. The most important thing about that book for me is his love for his son. And I think that is a message, you're right, that does not get talked about enough. And in this term about belonging, it is so huge. It is so huge. I mean, what are we doing to cultivate that sense of belonging? How are we actually, is that an agenda item? I make it an agenda item where I work, in terms of looking at the history of the institution at NYU. By way of example, um, the James Weldon Johnson, the author, Lift Every Voice and Sing, taught at NYU in 1938. And the course that he taught was Negro Contributions to America. So we have this ongoing persistent challenge that comes down to a couple of different factors. I'm gonna stop talking after this. The history of enslavement, how it's a shared experience, how there's a dissonance when we think about our identity and our choices. And then we go back and forth about how is who I am connected to my legacy and my connection. And that is a question I think I've asked myself as a Black man. And so the variables, again, are always present and always there, like Dr. Mincy says. History of enslavement, the shared experience, and then there's my own choices and my own identity and all the dissonance that's created by that. And then we have our young people walking into that. They're walking into that and they got no leadership, no connection, no support. And that is the gap. That is the huge gap where mentoring and being able to connect with that experience is huge in terms of navigating that journey. And not to mention, last thing I'm going to say about this is Julius Lester, author, writer, talked about his own complex identity, being Jewish, being Catholic. I believe he's being non-Jewish, if you will. The reason I'm saying this is that not only are we talking about all these different factors, but we're talking about the whole journey and how we're not even talking about how I can change my mind. I mean, what if I wanted to be Muslim tomorrow or the next day? No one's really talking about how I change in terms of my lives over time, in terms of that being an option for me in terms of my life. And so I'm glad that I was here for my daughter because I know the difference. I know the sting when your parents are not there. It is not a fun thing. And so that's why mentoring is such a huge important opportunity to be thinking about and being more strategic about filling in those gaps.
That's powerful. Wow. Wow, just that image of the unmet promises of a father, right? And how those things can be either debilitating, right? Or also just reframed as, I know who I want to be as a man going forward because of what I've experienced. And so thinking about that, I'll kind of wrap up with some questions from the audience, but there's some great links that are put in the chat that we're going to put in YouTube. Thank you, Dr. Mincy, for sharing some of those things that have some great research involved with supporting some people who are involved with the My Brother's Keeper movement, Dr. Louis Panwan, and also some others that are doing some great work. And so I think about purpose. We talked about leadership. We talked about mentorship. And I think about purpose a little bit now, and how we think about how mentorship and leadership ultimately lead to us finding out our purpose. One thing I'm really moved by is how a lot of times when you sort of think you can predict your career and your next steps, you get surprised constantly. And so sometimes, if you don't have a voice to speak into your life to help you realize maybe what your purpose is, or you don't have the spiritual groundation to actually commit to a purpose of who you are and who you want to be, sometimes mentorship is the first step, or leadership is the first step of you seeing someone speak into your life and help you figure out how to find your purpose. And regardless of whatever your profession is or your career is, we still have purpose defining moments that happen in us in our lives. And so those can go in any direction. They can come at any time, at any point. So what I want to ask you all just to reflect on a little bit, just as we begin to wrap up our time together, is what sort of purpose affirming practices do you have in your world that remind you of what you're here to do and keep you on track and disciplined to being the man that you want to be? And I think about that because, when you experience loss, when you experience a career change, when you experience being broke or some sort of life-altering moment, a lot of times your world can get very small and insular, and you're thinking about just the stress of the moment, and you might lose sight of the bigger purpose of who you are, why you're here. So I'm wondering, if you can just share the practices that you have that maintain purpose, focus, and purpose-driven decisions that allow you to be the man you want to be, and to instill in the next generation and those around you, the ability to also follow with discipline their own purpose. And so I'm going to just jump in with whoever seems like they're ready to go first. I'm looking at Mahaliel, so I'm Mahaliel. So if you don't mind, just jump in with that. How do you maintain your purpose-driven decisions?
This is the part where I want to say I have a vision board, or I write it down in a book. But I don't do any of that. I think the thing that keeps me the most on track is who and what I surround myself with. And let me be clear about that. When I look on my social media timeline, right, I'm seeing people getting their doctorates. I'm seeing people buying property. I'm seeing people getting promotions. And I know that there's enough on social media, and I use social media as a perfect example, who you're following, right? If you following the Instagram page that's going to give you every fight in the subway, right, and not the page that is going to show you how to buy a house for the first time, right? To me, those things can take you off track. They can be distractions. And so I think for me, not only the physical friends that I surround myself with, to make sure that, I got some friends who have made some mistakes and errors, but I also have friends. I make sure that I have enough friends that I'm you just got another degree? I got to step my game up. Or you just bought a new car? Oh, okay. But you didn't pay for that new car? You figured out right? Because sometimes we get caught up in material possessions, right? But I'm thinking about whatever my goals are around my academic success, around my upward mobility, right? And so making sure that we are, that I'm always happy in the job and proud of the work that comes out of my job, right? All those things matter. And so I think for me, that's the way that I keep myself moving right? It's by, like, yes, who I surround myself with. And I know that that sounds cliche to some people, but that couldn't be more than true. Like who you, right? Whatever that thing is, like, show me who your friends are and I can, like that concept. For me, that is absolutely 100% true. And that if you choose to surround yourself with folks, and like, if you choose to surround yourself with like the struggle, like you're gonna experience the struggle, right? Like in a way that may not be healthy for you. And so be considerate about who you're surrounding yourself with, and why. Be considerate about what you are exposing yourself to on social media. And social media has taken up so much time in our lives, and particularly in COVID has become so important. But I'm like, are you following Tabitha, or are you following who are you following and why? I think all of these things can help you, one, see what's possible, because it's hard to move when you can't see. Right. And so if I can't see where I'm going, then I'm just going to stay still. That's the safest thing for me to do. And so really consider what are those things that are going to allow to give you vision to move forward to the next space. And I'll stop there.
That's awesome. That's some good stuff right there. Alan.
I want to lift up a book by Keith Holmes, 200 Years of Black Inventors. 200 Years of Black Inventors. I want to just make sure that we lift up the success that all of our men who are on this call are capable of. That's number one. Number two, so I'll remind myself of the successes that we don't hear enough about. And we know it's there, and we know it's happening, and we know that it's happening in different pockets. So I certainly want to recognize and lift up that one book. Number two, so yeah, guiding principles. I have guiding principles. The guiding principles are going to help you navigate the complexity and the other challenges and how people see you, what's being reflected back, and they don't know even who you are. It's your guiding principles that's going to actually help you navigate the peaks and the valleys, the good times and the bad times, the races and everything else that comes your way. So my question to all the young men is, what are your guiding principles?
Yeah.
We are the instrument of our instruments. Kenneth Burke, definitely connecting to Dr. Bethia. We are the instrument of our instruments. So deep. What are you consuming? What you consume is what you put out there. And lastly, I'll say this, history is always in the present. I don't know what the confusion is about trying to decide whether history is valid or history is not. I mean, I believe in the Bible of the 1619 Project. Y'all better read that thing. And I'm gonna tell you something else. Nicole Hannah-Jones ain't nothing but Ida B. Wells reincarnated, but that's a whole nother conversation. But
that's good.
But I think that the history is important because practical reasons, right? They've been here before us. We are dealing with the same problems, the same issues. Look at the new Jim Crow. If you want proof that things are still challenging, so history is always in the present. So just being mindful of that. So those are the things that I think about in terms of sustaining myself.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Dr. Mincy. Put on your unmute, Dr. Mincy. Thank you.
So I would say from my part, what has guided me in making professional decisions is my personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That I've had to make critical decisions. And I can recall in 2008 when President Obama was elected, I wanted to go to the Federal Department of Health and Human Services to direct their work on fatherhood. I was prepared, I was ready, but I was recovering from cancer. And it broke my heart. I was ready for the moment. And however, what I did in that moment was I prayed about it. And I had a sense that this was not my time, that wasn't for me at that moment, though I wanted it so bad I could taste it. So I used my relationship with Christ, I used the word of God, and I used my relationship with my wife, right? She is placed in my life for a reason to help give me guidance. And those habits have never failed me in terms of the critical decisions that I have made in terms of whether to go to the right or to the left in any decision. And I'd also say, to return to this issue of fatherhood, one of the things that I've learned with my children is how to train my sons. I only have brothers and I only have sons. So the only thing I know about women is my mom, who I love, and my wife. That's it. I'm ignorant, right? The rest of it. But I have learned with respect to my sons that when they were young, and I say this to all of you who are in the audience who have children, when they're young, you know, you're in a position of authority, right? That's one thing. But as they get older, you don't have authority over them. So your ability to give them advice is to be a listener, is to negotiate an arrangement with them where they will come to you for advice, right? And then you can continue to play that role in their life, not as someone who only gives authority, but someone who loves them and who cares for them, so that when they get in a tough spot, they'll pick up the phone and call dad. That's what you want to do in terms of relationship with your sons, with your daughters, and that's the way you can fulfill some of this role that we've spoken about. And I suppose the same would be the case with a mentee, right? You want to put yourself in a position where they will come to you to seek your advice. And the word father means source, and that's what you want to do.
The word father means source. Ooh, that's strong right there. I love that. That's really good. So we talk about these guiding principles. I want to get to the audience questions as we wrap up the last few minutes together. And so one of the questions from the audience related to what we've been talking about is about an important leadership lesson. So the question was basically, what's the most important leadership lesson you've learned? If you think about leadership and think about just, you know, how it's impacted your life, what's the most important leadership lesson you've learned? And how has it proven to be invaluable? How has it proven to be invaluable? And so I won't call you specifically. If you feel like you want to speak to that, you can go ahead and jump on in. But what's the most important leadership lesson you've learned, and how has it proved to be invaluable? I'll say for me, you know, there's one thing I've always heard that I think I carried to this day in my career is that, you know, leaders set up the chairs and put the chairs away. And the value that I have with that is that, sometimes there's this feeling around leadership that I grew up with where just because I have the title of leader, that means everyone has to cater me and to be and kind of like pander to my emotional state. So if I'm in a good mood, then the room is in a good mood. If I'm in a bad mood, then everyone better be somber and reflective of how I'm feeling, as opposed to really being the one that it makes and facilitates the opportunity for those who they're leading to be able to express themselves, to participate and contribute positively to the environment that I'm in. And so kind of making that atmosphere right before they come into the room, so to speak, whether it be physically or emotionally, is important. And then saying at the end, listen, we're glad you were here, glad you were in this room. Your contributions were valuable and they mean something, and validate that, giving that validating language to make sure that people know that they belong and they have high value. That's been important to me. But I'm curious what's important to you. You're the panelist. Who wants to jump in with this one? All right, Alan, please.
Cultural humility. There's cultural competence, but the most important leadership lesson I've learned is cultural humility. I've actually been in conversation with about 3,000 international students, so I'm having this very unique, interesting perspective in thinking about the global community, but also the community in my own identity. Cultural humility. We all know the golden rule. I've recently learned that there's a platinum rule, and the platinum rule is let others tell you who they are and treat them that way in terms of how they want to be treated. And so cultural humility allows me to let folks' identity unfold. Really important concept, in particular when I think about my Black brothers, in terms of letting them have the space and the place. And even in my work, I think about the folks in the room and thinking about that technique. As a matter of fact, if you want to learn more about that, Dr. Mara Gottlieb is doing some very interesting work on cultural humility. but I kind of bring that to my work. So it was an important lesson in terms of just dealing with so many different perspectives and identities and feelings and thoughts and people's journey, which I keep bringing up. So cultural humility is probably the most important lesson that I've learned and actually utilize and apply.
Love that. Love that. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? Most important leadership lesson.
Yeah, one of my mentors actually taught me about the importance of not looking at leadership as a destination, right? I think a lot of times we say we want to be the director or the owner or the this, and then we get there, right, by way of all these different mentors and village, and we're like, yeah, we've arrived, right? And one of the things he pushed me to think about was, okay, and then what? So how many, and in my, when I was a principal, it was like, how many of my teachers could I grow and cultivate to become assistant principals and principals, and right, and like take on these leadership roles. And he taught me about the value of ensuring that I didn't only look at my success as my position, but my ability to position other people, right? And I think that that's something really important for us, right? And regardless of what industry you're looking at, if you're looking at, like, even if you go to sports, you're like, what's the difference between these superstars? It's usually the superstars are the ones that are making it their business to mentor the other ones, right? We're trying to figure it out. And so I think it's important for us in terms of leadership to say, number one, you haven't arrived when you've gotten that title, right? Because I've seen a lot of CEOs who aren't leaders. I've seen a lot of bosses who don't know how to lead. They do have that title. And then that leadership is actually the journey of growing yourself and growing others, right? To build them up to wherever they want to go.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would have to, I think the only thing I have to add to what my brothers have already said here is that, one, I would encapsulate some of what has been said about, that you need to get to learn well the people whom you are leading, so that you know how to position them to do the best work that they can. You need to know who is the person who, no matter what, you gotta give them 45 minutes every once in a while just to talk. They need that, right? And if they need that, you give it to them, because then that makes them productive. Whereas some people are analytical, you just ask them a question, they go away, they come back and they answer it. And then the only thing I could add to that is never be afraid not to be the smartest person in the room. That is, you have smart people at various things around you, acknowledge their expertise, that's not your expertise, and free them to get it done, right? I think this concept of leadership, that we know it all, that you're the smartest person in the room, it's just dangerous and unproductive. And it's sort of indicative of your lack of confidence, right? If I know I'm good at my thing, right, and I'm the leader of this, whatever it is, I can free others to be the best at what they do, and then we can get the job done. That's the most important lesson I've learned.
That's really good. That's really good. And I tell you, I look for brilliant people all the time, people who are smarter than me, to help me do things and to learn from, whether they be older, younger, doesn't even matter. But you brought up a really great point, which I think we're going to end with, which is my last question about from an audience member. And so, number one, there's some audience members who are looking for mentorship and for guidance. And so they're saying, how can we get in touch with you all? So please feel free to share any social media or any way that we can reach out if you are open to accepting more mentors. But then on top of that, just thinking about, you mentioned some people learn differently. So some people want ongoing, regular, reoccurring mentorship. Some people just need someone they can touch base with every now and then. So how would you all recommend about, like, how does mentorship typically happen? Can you describe the different styles that you started alluding to, Dr. Minty, of how mentorship can happen, and how to even not be discouraged if you haven't talked to your mentor or mentee in a year or a month or a week? How do we continue that momentum and figure out what kind of relationship works best for two people?
Well, I recall attending a seminar at Columbia University. It was on exactly this topic, about how when you develop mentoring relationships and you sort of depart from your immediate relationship with who that mentor is, that you want to keep that person in your network and occasionally shoot them an email or to forecast, I haven't talked to you in 3 years, but or in the last couple of months, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, so that you remain in touch with your mentor. So it doesn't have to be a day-to-day thing, but then you have the license when you need either their expertise or when you need their influence to open a door for you. You've established an ongoing relationship so that you can call upon them at some moment. That's expected, and then they can continue to provide the intermittent support that you need. And that is part of the way one does networking. And if I can find it, I will find the resource, because it was actually a training, and I'll share it with you so that you can make it available on the YouTube site as well.
Awesome. That's really good. Thank you so much.
I would say if you are a CUNY student, you strongly recommend you join CUNY BMI. I mean, let's just make sure that's happening. I mean,
Hey, good plug.
Yes, you have got to join CUNY BMI. I mean, I think that is an imperative if you're thinking about your future, the foundation, and where it can carry you, not only with the mentors that are maybe in the program, but your fellow students. So I want to lift up the CUNY program, which is not only, it is a national model, an award-winning program. So I want to lift that up. I'm on LinkedIn, so hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm definitely on LinkedIn. And then finally, I got good news for all the young men on this call. I got some fantastic news. Guess what? Whatever position or role that you aspire to, you can be that person now.
Who do you mean, Alan? How do you do that?
Let me say that again. Whatever role or position that you aspire to become, you can be that person now. Why are you waiting for someone to give you a title or a degree? Think about what it is in terms of what you want to bring and how you need to carry yourself and what you want to promote. Taking me full circle back to the guiding principles. When I started at NYU, I was the receptionist at the career development office. And now I'm an assistant vice president. How are you thinking about your own sort of presence? And obviously you have to learn those skills. This is what you get from your mentors. This is what you get for being in programs. But I just want to free that up. I really want to impress upon you. You don't have to wait to think that you got to think about being in a place. You can be that person now. Why not?
Yeah.
And that's the beginning step, so you can begin to receive programs like mentoring or other events, and just show up, and you'll be surprised where it will take you.
Yeah. Alan, it's interesting because you told me about 20 years ago, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be with my career, you asked me, you said, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to kind of be like you. I kind of want to be an administrator and work at a college and direct a program. And you said, well, here's my resume. Look at my resume. This is what I've done. Do what I've done. And so interesting that was impetus for me to also just tell young people all the time, look at the resumes of the people that you want to be, or you feel like you're aspiring to, see what they're doing, and see how you can incorporate those behaviors into your life right now. You don't have to, if you want to be a college president, you don't have to wait until you are one to start raising money for someone, or to build networks, or to speak, or to direct, or to give advice to others who are needing your consultation. You can start those behaviors now. And so it's not about the goals, it's about the behaviors, and behaviors ultimately lead you to where you want to go. So I love that advice. Thank you for that. And thank you for letting us know that we can contact you on LinkedIn. I appreciate that as well. And we'll make sure that that is clear. One thing I want to just distinguish before Dr. Bethia goes is just, someone mentioned in the chat on YouTube, the difference between a role model and a mentor, right? Understanding that role models can just be people you admire who are out there, but mentor you actually have a relationship and build trust with, you can actually have access to. And so knowing that you have access to us right now in this moment, please take advantage of that and look for us and LinkedIn and all the places you can find us in social media and via email. So Dr. Bethia, close us out. Please give us your best your best takeaways, advice for this?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, Dr. Empathia 2. I'm on IG, Dr. Logistics. I'm on the social media. Anybody on this call that can hear my voice that is really trying to figure out like this education game, like I am happy. I mean, if it wasn't for my mentors, I would not be in the position that I'm in. And I really appreciated what Alan said about you being that person now. That's in how you dress, how you act, how you approach your work scope. And that matters. That matters. And know that just as you are observing people, people are also observing you. And if it wasn't for like the right people observing me at the right time, I mean, there's no way I would have been a school principal at 28. That was because somebody was like, I think this brother, you know, he looks the part, the kids like him, blah, 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 blah. Right. But that was me showing up to work and claiming, right, that yes, I'm a teacher, I'm a dean, but there's still a way that I need to dress and act and move and sound. And so, you know, anybody on the call that's interested in kind of like talking through education, please contact me through any social media platform. Alan, I just messaged you on LinkedIn, brother. And for anybody watching, also know that, like, again, it never stops. You never know when you're going to come across somebody that you can share a resource with, gain access with, and ultimately build success with. And so those are my parting words. You know, I look forward to anybody who needs or wants my assistance and support.
I'm gonna find you, Dr. Mincy.
I just found
please do. I just put my thing in there. Yeah.
I just found Dr. Mincy right now, so you'll see my request coming through as well. Thank you for being available, and I love that. I mean, the idea of having, even if it's a one-time conversation, that is sometimes enough mentorship to unlock something that's in your brain that needs to be realized.
Absolutely correct. And just really quickly, like just to show you, like there was a woman who was talking at a conference. I messaged her. She sent me her one-pager. I just started my educational consulting. I'm about to message her and say, like, thank you. Like, all she did was say, like, you could use me. She sent me like some stuff, and I was able to create it into like an additional stream of income, right? And so, like, you never know. Every time you're in a conversation or in a room like this, like, just the ability to like just engage with these folks can actually yield some pretty fast results.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And thank you for that. That is so powerful. I don't know if people always realize the power of these conversations, because now that we have a network that's expanding from these conversations, we now have more access points to opportunity and to access points to bringing equity in the way that we experience, economic and social mobility in this world. It's super important for us to have these moments. So thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today. And we appreciate your transparency, openness, and just sharing your personal stories of how you have developed your own career journeys and your own personal lives and paths and your own faith, even, and building a strong foundation. And so that has been the end of our BMI Dialogues for this month. We'll see you in about a month, the second week of May. And we're excited to bring you some more amazing leaders and public speakers. This is fantastic, amazing opening. I can't tell if like the second shot of the COVID vaccine has just hit me hard today, or y'all were just bringing a fire, and I just felt energized. And so I appreciate you all for what you're doing, and keep building the community in the ways that you are. We need it. We need you. You are pillars for us. You are role models. We're watching you. We're looking at you. You're the ones that give us hope and confidence about the choices that we're making. And so thank you for doing what you do. Keep it doing it, and send you blessings, send you God's blessings, and be well. For the audience who's watching, keep following us on CUNY BMI, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, at CUNY BMI, and we'll be here to support you along the way for future events. So we'll see you, and remember, I am BMI. Take good care, everybody.